All right, RichE, welcome back. We're here to talk email because I know the last few podcasts we mentioned email. We didn't really talk about platforms, so I thought it's a good time to dive in. Without further ado, let's bring in our guest, Amandine Liepmann. Amandine, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm doing great. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I know you talked with RichE previously. Let's give your company and your background to give an intro.
Sure. So I own a email marketing agency. I deal with all different platforms, but mostly MailChimp email marketing is my number one. I also sell pre-made templates for specific industries. So I'm an expert vetted top 1% email marketer on Upwork. I've been doing this for about 10 years and the templates are new. It's something that I just came out with just to help small businesses kind of get their feet wet and give them some guidance on best practices for email marketing and how to get the most out of it.
Awesome. And just to make sure we mention it for you, what's the company name?
That probably helps, right? It's Listburst and the website is listburst.com.
All right. This is a marketing podcast, so I'm just making sure we get our marketing chops in there. All right. So Amandine from listburst.com. And how did you get your initial experience with email marketing, e-commerce, etc.?
Sure. So I am not a original kind of entrepreneur or business person. I started my career as a professor of English and creative writing. I loved it. I loved teaching, but it was not something I saw myself doing long term. And after I finished grad school, I taught for a few years and then took a job in New York City. It was a huge jump. I moved from Eastern Michigan University to New York to take a job with an early literacy nonprofit. And it was a great job. I loved it. New York City is amazing, especially if you're in your 20s and you don't have children. I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always kind of had what people call now side hustles, right? To be able to afford rent in New York City, I had a website that was editing dissertations. And then I had my daughter and she was maybe like 2 years old. She's obsessed with dinosaurs. And back then, there were no clothes with dinosaurs on them for girls. Now they're all over the place. But back then, there was nothing. And so, as a really fun kind of side project, I made this dinosaur dress for her birthday. And we would wear it to the park. And in New York City, people flipped out about it and would beg me to make them one. And they just never seen anything like it. And I couldn't believe that people loved it so much because this is not what I did. But one of my former business partners said, why don't we do a Kickstarter and see if there's like genuine interest for this. So we did, and we raised almost $40,000 in 30 days. And that's how I funded my first kind of big e-commerce company. And we had it for about 3 years before we sold it. It was an amazing experience. And that's when I kind of realized like, oh, this is who I am. I'm an entrepreneur. I want to solve these problems. And I always say I'm more of a social entrepreneur. I care about both the financial aspects and about solving problems that I see that pop up in my life, which I think is a lot of the basis of a lot of entrepreneurs. They see something that's not working or something they can solve, and then they do something to change it. And it's been life-changing for me because that's my community. You know what I mean? Like that's where I've kind of found my home is among entrepreneurs, especially among women entrepreneurs. And so when we were running my former company, it was called Mitts Kids. And I realized very quickly that email marketing was the number one channel to drive sales and engagement. And it was the least expensive channel for the most impact. And nobody talked about it because I think social media is so much more fun, right? It's like email marketing is not fun. It can sometimes be very technical. And I think it encompasses a lot of things that people are kind of scared to do, like write to people and things like that. But it really, again and again, between our welcome sequence, between kind of these different custom segments that we had set up, we were seeing the absolute highest return. And so most people don't know that email marketing is actually as successful as it is. I get asked at least once a week if it's dead, right? So I'm like, who's saying this? Like, I don't know who's saying this, but it is not dead. It is the number one marketing channel by far. Every dollar invested returns, an average of $42, which is just an insane ROI. To put that in perspective, social media, every dollar invested, a good number is $5 in return. And so people really don't harness it as much as I think they possibly could. It's something that whenever I talk to clients, they'll say, oh, we haven't paid that much attention to it, or we haven't put too much time into it because it takes too long. And it's to their detriment because I think it can change the whole landscape of your business so quickly with just a few key emails or just a few, maybe a day or two worth of effort. So that's how I got into it. And email marketing, once I sold my other company, I thought, what am I going to do now? Right? I have this kind of varied resume. I thought, email marketing was what I really love. And it encompassed both kind of my love of design and my love of writing and communicating. And it's just, email marketing can be an art form. And I love it. I love kind of figuring out the nuances of audiences and what drives people to action. And it's always different. Every audience is so different that getting to know them has just been really fun, and getting to know other businesses and what they're doing. Oh my gosh, I just love meeting people who are doing cool stuff and putting themselves out there and being brave. And those are my people.
Awesome. Yeah. You're a freelancer, so you're on Upwork. So you are getting a chance to really meet a lot of different people and work with all sorts of different businesses. I want to repeat what you said too. Like, email marketing is not dead. It is usually the number one marketing channel for almost all types of businesses, particularly in e-commerce. I don't know how many times we have to say it on this podcast, but as you're building your business, this is the gold. Build the list, use the list, send emails, don't be shy. So yeah, I'm glad you found your place in the world.
Me too.
Yeah, it's funny. Every time someone says email is dead, it's usually someone who sells a different service or someone who just didn't know how to use their email, didn't know how to gather emails, or they never sent emails, right? But it's the number one thing that everyone signs up for social, that or phone number, right? You can't even get on social without one of those two, if not both. And to your point, when you're joking, saying it's not sexy or it's, it's not fun, I'll tell you what's sexy and fun: sales. Sales are sexy and fun. So like people like those things. So when someone's first getting started, what do you recommend to get people on the list?
Building that list initially.
Just to get started. Yeah. Cause we have a full integration with MailChimp on Ecwid. So
MailChimp is amazing because of all of the incredible features that it has, oftentimes that are free, right? If you have an account, it has free landing pages. There's a lot of things that you can do with the platform. But ultimately, if you're getting started, I would say the best thing you could do to grow your email list, organically at least, I actually just posted a blog post about this, is to place your sign up anywhere and everywhere, right? I put it in every blog post. There's an email sign up list in my email signature. When I send an email, just interacting with people, it's in my email signature. I put it on my social media. I put it on just absolutely everything, so that if people are interested in the content that you're putting out, I always say, please, subscribe. And then really the most important thing is that you have some kind of sequence in place to nurture those leads, right? It's not just about having them sign up, but having them sign up and get to know you and make it, a memorable experience. So welcome sequence is maybe like 2 to 5 emails where you just talk about what you do and who you are and introduce yourself so that they get to know you a little bit. And in that reference, I always say a welcome series is like an introduction, right? It's like meeting someone at a networking party, right? You want to introduce yourself first and kind of get ahead, because people respond better, I think, when you offer that information first. But you also want to make sure that that information that you're sharing is relevant to that audience. So if you're going to do what I call lead gens or lead magnets, there's a bunch of different ways that you can also bring people into that list. So I've seen some really high success lately with quizzes. People love quizzes. I think it's like the 90s, early 2000s magazine quizzes that people just have gotten used to taking, and now there's a digital version. Those have really great results. Neil Patel has an amazing quiz that he did that was, essentially saying, answer these 7 questions and I'll give you a 30-day email marketing plan to improve your ROI. And he had 700,000 email signups from that one quiz, which was just absolutely mind-boggling. Another one is just creating, content that is really highly valuable and giving away for free, which is sometimes painful. But if your lead magnet isn't super valuable, it's not going to have any traction. So I wrote like a 15-page guide on how to write high converting email subject lines. And that was a recent lead magnet that I put out to see, how it would perform. And that is more of a paid action, right? I really like doing lead gen ads, things like that, to see what resonates, right? What connects with your audience. And even if you create something and it doesn't resonate the first time, don't be discouraged by that, because it takes a little while to know who you're trying to connect with and what's important to them. And you have to rework it a little bit until you find, that sweet spot that people really are like, oh, wow, this is really high value. And we really appreciate it because it just makes an incredible impression.
So if we were going back to your origin story with the dinosaur pajamas, dresses, whatever different things you sold, what would be an example of a lead magnet for something like that? Someone selling a widget here on Ecwid, use that store as an example.
Yeah. So I would say whenever you're working with consumer product goods or actual physical products, not service-based, discounts are always kind of the OG, right? Of opt-ins. If you have a pop-up on your website that your first order is maybe 15% off, those perform insanely well, always across the board, especially because people are so used to those. And that's usually the number one thing I say with, make sure that your website is optimized to capture those emails and that traffic that's coming to your site, especially if it's organic traffic. People are finding you, they're already interested, they're already excited about, you, and they've made it to your website. So that's just one kind of additional thing you can offer them to create a sale or really drive it home.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to go there, Amandine, because the pop-ups and the initial discount are always a little controversial.
Yeah.
I've seen a little different ways to do it, but I think getting that email is so valuable. And if you don't have any other idea, like if you're like, oh yeah, lead magnet, I should do a lead magnet, but I don't know what it is, then just do a discount because it will work and you see them all the time. It will not be weird.
Yeah, people get annoyed for sure when they go on websites, but I'm always intrigued by the data because have you ever gone to a website and it has almost like a spinning wheel where you can like choose your discount? So
Sure.
To me, I always think like those are not for me for my particular like type of branding, but they're so successful. Like those have a 9% opt-in rate, whereas a regular standard pop-up has about 3 to 4. And it always blows my mind because I'm like, really? Like really? Like that to me, I find them kind of annoying. But I think for a lot of people, it's fun. It's something kind of interesting and novel. I always test like different things. It could be a discount. It could be $1 off, an actual dollar amount, or it could be free shipping, right? I always test those out to see what people find the most valuable. And that is kind of how I whittle those things down. And then also just making sure you have an opt-in on your website, right? So like in your footer, in your content, like I mentioned in your blog, I always say like, I'm going to annoy you with how many times I ask you to join my email list.
Yeah, I think those are good best practices, like do the pop-up. And yeah, you might surf and be like, you're going to close those immediately. And then you look at the site a little later, you're like, okay, I guess I want in. And then you look on the footer and there should be one in the footer to sign up for the email list. Like those are good best practices for everybody to follow. And hopefully if you have any like mental block, there was 3 ideas right there that you can all do.
Yeah. And I always include some kind of caveat to say like, I'm not going to spam you, right? People are over spam and email marketing is growing in a way that it's making it even more important that people are subscribed to only the content they're actually interested in receiving. Like I really don't want someone to subscribe to my list who's not interested in the content. Like that to me is not a valuable email, but the person who is, it's pure gold, right? When someone's really interested in it. But yeah, it's about making it easy. It's about making those opportunities for people to be a part of it. And then also talking about it in a way that's enticing. So I always say, something along the lines of like, get your highest ROI with these 4 tips, right? Or something that like people, can get information really quickly.
Perfect. I want to jump back into the opening sequence. For people that are like, okay, yeah, I know we're going to do 3 to 5 emails. And then they log into MailChimp and they write their first email. And then that's like writer's block.
Yeah, they get paralyzed. I always say, it's like the old English professor in me, but I say, write without fear of judgment. Like write like you're writing to yourself almost, right? Like get it out. You always have to have the context of your audience, but getting it out sometimes is the hardest part. I used to do this exercise where I would have students, they would get so nervous to make a mistake that they would just not be able to get ideas out. But I would say, just write for 5 minutes, like on a piece of paper. Don't let your pen or pencil come off the paper. Just keep writing for 5 minutes about what you want to say. And no matter what, like there's going to be a lot of like stuff that you're going to edit out and things, but you're going to get the idea of what you're trying to say and kind of that core. And it's going to come from a genuine place, which people identify with the most. And then I always say, especially now in the last few months, I use Jasper and ChatGPT all the time, right? Like they are your best friend for when you're a little scared. This is like my most common prompt, but I'll say, make this better or flesh this out. And it really helps to have that backdrop and just having those other ideas be able to generate without it being totally on you. The other thing I always recommend is having Grammarly installed on your computer. It's a great app. I love it. I'm not affiliated with it. I just love it. I think it's a great company and it helps if you are worried about making grammar mistakes, if you are worried about context or things like that, it's going to catch it really quickly and easily so that you can write really high quality content that is going to resonate without having to worry about making those mistakes.
All right. So now if we got people on the idea, like I'm going to write my opening sequence, what can they do to really start making money with MailChimp or, maximizing MailChimp for their e-commerce store?
Well, I would say that the welcome sequence is such a great low-hanging fruit for that because it has a much higher open rate than your standard email. So standard email might be between 20 and 30%. That's a great number, but a welcome series might be between 50 and 80% open rate. So it's really kind of where you want to make the best impression and really where we see the most consistent long-term sales. And so I always say, introduce yourself, but don't introduce yourself like, hi, I'm Amandine. This is what I like to do, right? You want to focus on the transformation that you're providing that person, right? So whatever your product is, whatever your service is, talk more about, you want to introduce yourself and they want to know that they can trust you and that you have the experience and things like that. But you want to talk about the transformation that you provide and why it's important to you. So I always talk about how I love MailChimp because they're so focused on small business and I'm a huge supporter of making sure that small businesses have the tools that they need to market themselves, because it's often kind of a point of entry that gets denied to people who are just starting out, or people like me with Mitts, who's just scared out of my mind and didn't know what marketing was or how you do it, or it's just a great entry point for that.
At Ecwid, we interview our customers quite a bit and we post these interviews. And I saw this comment from a customer. They're like, okay, I have MailChimp and I have Ecwid. I haven't connected the store. And they had like a big list of custom demands. Like, can you build this thing that shows the last time they bought and the last time this? And I'm like, oh, this person really just needs to connect the store, because if you connect the store, there's a variety of things that it opens up for you. So I think, we could talk about a few things like that. Like, just for instance, all the sales are completely connected to MailChimp. So if you say, I want to send an email to somebody that purchased 45 to 47 days ago, it's all there. So now, knowing that we're integrated, is there some other additional tips you could have?
Sure. I would say the easiest thing is having a template, right? Having something that you can recreate very easily and create emails so it's not reinventing the wheel every single time. And this is how really big companies do this, how they send out so many emails, is that they're not reinventing the wheel every time they create content. They're taking the same template and repurposing it. That's number one. Number two is creating those custom segments, right? Like, it's once you've created a welcome sequence and once you've kind of gotten the hang of automations, I would say start with your welcome sequence first and then branch out from there, because that's, to me, is the most important. And the second is you want to create these segments that create connection and also really make the people who are supporting you feel supported, right? So if you have an email that goes out to anyone who's made a purchase in the last 30 days, that's amazing. If you want to capture people who maybe have made a purchase in the last 6 months but haven't recently, that's another segment that you can create. I always create, especially for the clients that I work with, opportunities where we're creating, maybe it's a steeper discount or opportunities to get to know people or free webinars or things like that with your most loyal customers. So those people who have made multiple orders, those people who have really invested in you as a brand and a company, they're like your cheerleaders, right? You've got to make sure that you're creating that kind of nuanced digital relationship with them. And that's the beauty of email marketing, is the ability to do that in mass, right? Maybe you have 10, 15, 20,000 people on your email list. This is a very big email list, but if you want to reward or talk to those 1,000 people who always show up for you, who comment on your social media, who make the purchases, that's really where you're going to build that incredible loyal fan base that's going to expand, because they're going to tell other people about your brand and it's going to kind of go out from there. Other things is just making sure that you have kind of transactional segments in place. So making sure you have an abandoned cart email, making sure that you have a post-purchase follow-up email. One of the things I like to do that's more advanced once we have more data is to do a product recommendation email. So if someone has bought one product that we know is very common that people will buy another product, maybe we'll send an email recommending it to them, or a sequence just talking about what other things you can offer or opportunities that they can experience. So recently I worked with a plumbing company and they said, we offer these monthly memberships or these services, and we feel like we're not selling them well enough. People are interested, but we can't get them to kind of close when we're doing work on their house, probably because they're spending thousands of dollars with the plumber and they're not really in the mood. I said, maybe it's about following up with them. You want to make sure everything's okay. Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's an email. And then maybe it's also about creating emails that talk about the problems that you're solving for them. Like if it's people go out of town and you want to be able to maintenance things while they're away, you can talk about those things and make sure that you're presenting it in such a way that it's like, oh, I noticed that you have these problems. Let me solve that for you. So anytime you can add value where you feel like you're really focusing on the problems that you're solving in any kind of sequence, not just in transactional or welcome sequences, it makes such a massive impact with your audience.
Yeah, it's a great point. They just spent thousands of dollars in this hypothetical scenario.
Usually unexpectedly.
Unexpectedly, right? They're spending thousands of dollars now. And an email sequence that is saying how they can maintain their house, how they can potentially keep this from happening again. It's almost like, if you can think of it from what is the thing that you can teach them to do that would almost keep them from having to use your services, now they're even more so wanting to use you. You're the roofer who's trying to teach them how to maintain their house, clean your gutters, do these things. We don't know when the roof's going to finally go bad, but which roofer are you going to call when this guy's been sending you emails and telling you how to not have to hire him? Now you're really going for that transformation. It's not buy my thing. And we're in business. We're trying to sell things. What I'm getting at is being playful, testing, to your point earlier, and really coming at it from the perspective of What are the problems we're solving based on the product we're selling to, and what are they really actually going through? And that's kind of the challenge. What would you recommend for the person who's listening that thinks, yeah, well, that's all fine and dandy. You're a ex-professor. One thing I'll throw out there, I get writer's block all the time. So sometimes I'll just open up Google Doc, go to the tools and hit voice type, and then just kind of verbally get that out there on paper for a little while. But my question to you is, how in depth do they need to go? Are we talking paragraph? Are we talking a page or two? Do you test a bunch? What do you see?
That's an amazing question. I have noticed that, and there's been studies that have come out about this, but pre-pandemic, you had about 13 seconds to grab someone's attention and drive them to action in an email, which is a very short period of time. Now it's around 7. It's very low, and you have to get information very quickly. And I feel like as we move more into video format and having information given in video, that'll probably go down even more. So typically when I create an email, my goal is to have one call to action, one piece of information, and one CTA. It seems so basic and simple. And if you see my own emails that I send out, I don't spend more than maybe a half hour creating that email because I want the most value out of it. But I also understand that if I spend hours and hours and hours creating all this content, that more than likely people are not going to read it. And so I try to make sure that that content's very, very succinct. That's also where ChatGPT is really helpful because I'm very verbose, right? I'm a writer. So I feel like when I have to pare things down, Jasper has an amazing tool. You can basically say, I want to say this, but I want to say it on a 5th grade level, or I want to say it on, so an 8-year-old can understand it. Clearly, we know we're not sending emails to 8-year-olds and that this is not how we think of people, but that quickness that they can grab a concept or information and the ease with which they can grab it is very, very important. And a typical email, when you open it in your inbox, anything that you see when you first open it is called above the fold, meaning that's your most valuable real estate, your most valuable content, because people are going to decide so quickly whether or not they're going to click through or take the action that you're asking them to do. So I really don't use more than 2 to 3 sentences in an email, unless it's something that needs it or there's more specific detailed information I want to provide. So it might be something where, going back to the plumber example, they might have like a monthly maintenance schedule or something like that they want you to sign up for. So maybe above the fold, you can click and go right to the landing page or wherever they need you to sign up. And then below the fold are the details of that offer. Like you can put that kind of information there. So if someone wants to reference it before they decide, some people just need a little bit more, I don't want to say selling, but convincing. And that's a great place to put it. But you always want to focus the most on the very top. People talk to me all the time about email marketing and they'll say, I don't have time. I can't do it. It's too complicated. And I'll say, listen, the most successful emails are text-based emails. Some of the highest performing emails I've ever seen are a paragraph that someone sent out from a company. It's amazing to me because those emails have the highest deliverability. You're not dealing with images. You're not dealing with these things that kind of make an email slower to load. And it also tends to be very succinct. And when someone receives a text-based email, sometimes they'll think, oh, this is coming directly from the person. This is an email they wrote. Even if I have like a footer, they still think that. And so sometimes I utilize that as well to balance things out because sometimes I just don't have the time. But I was recently doing consulting for this huge company. They have over 1 million email followers. And it was a case study in simplicity. They were doing maybe $200,000 or $300,000 a year. They definitely could be doing more from their emails, but they were creating emails in 10 minutes or under. That was their rule. So they were literally sometimes just putting a product and a button. That was it. And it blew my mind that some of those emails were higher performing than these like very well thought out, nuanced things. And you want to create like that long term. I always say email marketing is like a relationship. You want to nurture it and you want to nurture it long term. But sometimes you don't have time for a huge nurturing email. So I always say your welcome sequence is where you can provide more information. That's what it's kind of for. And then any kind of transactional email, any kind of follow-up email, things like that need to be very simple because those are going to be the most successful.
I want to dive into that a little bit more because I've actually been having this discussion with RichE on header and versus text, especially since you work with templates. So in MailChimp, I have a template, there's a header, there's a footer, and even a quick email, I'll start with that template and I'll leave the header there and I'll write a quick note. And yes, sometimes I spend hours on it and sometimes 15 minutes. But back to your point on a text only, would you recommend trying where you just remove the header so it looks more like an email from the owner, or
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my signature moves, right? I use it the most after a product purchase, right? So I send a follow-up email, maybe like 2-3 days after a product purchase. So soon after they've experienced the product, they're working with it. And it sounds like it's coming from my Gmail, right? It's literally just me saying like, hey, first name that we can put in. I just wanted to make sure everything's going okay. Here's the resources. If you need anything, I'm here. I want to make sure that that person feels supported and like they're hearing directly from me. So to be able to do that in mass is such an amazing tool, because I've heard so many times people say like, oh, Amandine, that email was so nice. Like, what a nice follow-up. And I'm like, it's on autopilot, right? It's like, anything you can automate that creates connection or things like that. I always say, absolutely. So it's about kind of knowing that balance, when to send that and when that's valuable. And then when, the big fancy email is also valuable. And typically it does not have to be complicated. It really doesn't.
Okay, great tip. So RichE, you win that. Shout out to you. Yeah, we spend so much time working on our branding and, a fancy header, fancy footer. And yeah, maybe that just doesn't work all the time or shouldn't be used all the time.
Or A/B test and to see, oh, did more people open this and respond? And even for those emails, I won't even use like a huge call to action button. I'll use underlined hyperlink text. This is what I found across millions of emails, is that the color blue, because people associate it with a hyperlink, they're way more likely to click on it. And for some reason, if you present it in like the Microsoft Word style, which like the underline with like the blue text, they know like, oh, this is clickable. And there's something about that gets a great response.
Imagine we're just starting and we don't know anything about this. Is this very complicated? Is this somewhat complicated? Keep in mind, I'm not expecting you to walk us through the whole process, but give us a teeny bit about what that would take for them to give that a shot.
So MailChimp has a lot of great ways that you can do A/B testing. And when I say A/B testing, I just mean taking one idea and testing it against another idea. And I do this all the time because I think it's important to understand kind of what resonates. And this is how you learn what resonates with your audience. So if I have one specific subject line, maybe I'll recreate the same email and test a different subject line to see what gets the most opens. And then I'll also test content. I always isolate it to one variable because you don't want to A/B test a million different things at once because it's not going to be as sufficient. But if I want to test a subject line, then I'll do that. If I want to test content, then I'll test, 2 emails to see which one is getting the most engagement or sales. And then essentially what I'll do is drop the one off that's not performing as well. And MailChimp, you can do this with almost every piece of the puzzle. So you can do this in your automations. You can do this through your email subject line. You can do it through the content. There's a lot of great features available to help you understand what your audience needs. And I always joke with companies because I always ask them like, which one do you think is going to perform the best, right? Like just guess. And they're always wrong. Maybe not always, but it's always so interesting to see how an audience responds and how they react. And by putting, these multiple kind of variations of the content or action that you're trying to get people to take out there, you can really get an idea of who they are and what kind of content they like to receive.
I would imagine you find one to be the winner. You have A and you have B. Email A goes out, it becomes the winner. Email B performs super poorly. You can now take email A and send it to the people who received email B. And now you really know if it was a winner, if all of a sudden it performs just as good, or at least they might be getting the same context.
The same email twice.
They've seen it twice, but if you see any bump, that's a great example, because although I love testing too, we got to be on top of it, because when one is winning, that means one is losing. We talk about things almost as if they're in a silo sometimes on the podcast because we're talking about a certain subject and we only have so much time, but it's really a product ecosystem. You have content that's going out there. Some people are right in the middle of the problem. Some people, you're making them aware they have the problem. They don't even know it yet. And there's just so many different things going on. But yeah, I think that A/B testing is probably one of the more underutilized features. Obviously, get going and get people on an email list first. Step one.
Right. And that I agree wholeheartedly. And I feel like that's something I didn't understand, A/B testing, or what that even meant until I had maybe my second year of e-commerce business. And I would make a habit of like, if I met someone or network with someone who was running a really successful business, I would maybe call them and say, what are you doing for email marketing? Or what are you finding is the most successful? Because I find just asking people questions who are doing really well is really a great way to find that out. And one of them said, you really should be A/B testing. And I was like, A/B what? It's like, I don't know what that means. And that's how I learned about it. And so now it's something I utilize all the time because it's so interesting to me to see how people respond. And every audience is so different for each company or each person that I don't like to make any assumptions about anybody. I like to kind of put the content out there and let the data speak for what the best practices are for moving forward.
Yeah. And just for anyone listening, like if A/B testing scares you, I will just assure you, it is very easy to at least just test the subject line. You can just test the subject line and you'll get a bunch of information from that and improve your performance.
Like the gatekeeper. It's the first thing people encounter. There's a stat that came out last year that said essentially 60% of people decide whether or not to report an email as abuse based on the subject line alone. Meaning like they don't even need to see the email. If you like make them angry with your subject line, they'll just report it anyway. And so it's so important. It's the very last thing that I write when I'm making an email because I want to really be in the mindset of the person that I'm trying to connect with. And I find that I am in that best mindset after I've created or written the content. And so I always test it. And it is the hardest piece of writing for any email. It's the email subject line and preview text. It's the most valuable and it's the most difficult.
You spent all this time writing the email and maybe you did spend an hour and then you go back and it's really like maybe 60 to 100 characters, but you really have to nail that or no one's going to click into the email or read all that hard work you put into the email. So
yeah, absolutely. There's also another similar to ChatGPT and Jasper called Ecwid. And Ecwid is really interesting. I use all of them, but Ecwid is really interesting for email subject lines because it gives you a score. So essentially it'll tell you like, this is what we predict for the highest level of engagement. And they can do it for email subject lines. And I find this to save me a lot of time because that's my moment where I get paralyzed, right? Like I can sit there and be like, oh no, I have to think of something witty or fun or succinct enough that people are enjoying the experience, but also get the point of what I'm trying to get across. And that is really hard to do in 9 words or less, typically for a subject line. So Ecwid is a great way for me to test and kind of say like, if I wrote this to this audience and they're using different metrics to determine that, but I find that generally they're pretty correct. So I try to hit, a score that's somewhere between 80 and 100, meaning that it's going to entice them enough to open it. It's going to be interesting, but it's not kind of giving away the whole thing, right? You want to really kind of create something engaging and create something that cues people's interest in a way that they're like, oh, well, I'm going to actually open that out of the 300 emails that I have in my inbox right now.
So we're talking about emails, obviously, but Mr. Beast, huge YouTuber, some of you know, some don't know, he breaks it down that the subject line is more or less like the thumbnail of a video. Is this worthy of clicking on? And then what's inside is the video or the contents of the email. And then did you make it valuable enough that they wanted to watch it all the way through or read it all the way through? And did you provide them enough value that they now are going to click and do the thing you asked them to do, right? But in its most basic form, we're not trying to sell them in the subject line. There's not a clickable link to go shopping right there. That's going to lead them down the path towards that which you are wanting them to do, helping them solve the problem, whatever it is you're doing in that content. To put it back in context, correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm missing anything. First and foremost, build your list. Secondly, start to do some sort of welcome sequence. Thirdly, some sort of post purchase and or abandoned cart. We didn't really talk about abandoned cart emails. And then being willing to A/B test and try different things, because to your point about the company, when you asked them to pick which one and they were wrong, I believe part of why that happens is we're staring at our baby all the time. We know our business. We know it already. We know this stuff. We're not always remembering that this person might not know anything about us or the problem, or even know they have the problem yet.
Absolutely. Yeah. Also, just making sure that all those transactional emails are in place. That's especially doing sales. If you're, having an abandoned cart, having a post-purchase follow-up. So where you might ask for a review, that's typically where I'll put that, that email that sounds like it's coming directly from me. Like, how are you? How are things? Especially even like for the plumbing example, I have them do this, 3 days after, right? So they have someone call and then they have an email that goes out if they don't answer. It's just so important to make sure that people feel taken care of, right? That they feel heard. And the way that you do that is having those communications in place, but having those communications in place in a meaningful way, right? Like we're not just blasting them with content. We're not just, sending them sale email after sale email. We're really thinking about, what that person's point of view is like and getting to know them. And I say like, it's kind of like dating, right? It's like you might go on a date. I mean, you might know a little bit about them, but you don't really know until kind of you start talking to them and you have these interactions with them. And oftentimes in the beginning, I've had a lot of people say to me, I don't want to send a lot of emails because I don't want to spam people. And I say, you're not spamming people if they signed up for your email list, right? It's like, you're not spamming people if they bought your product. Like, unless they opted out, which they have the option to do, you're not spamming them and they want to hear from you. You shouldn't be scared of that.
Yeah, I think those are good tips to leave everybody with, because we've said that many times too. Like, you're going to need to send emails. You're not spamming them. You need to kind of get over that hump. You're in business and people signed up for your email list, so you can get them. I would also mention for people that hear this transactional emails, just know that those are all pretty much set up. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here to send a review email a certain amount of days after purchase.
Yeah, all of those automations, they call them customer journeys in MailChimp, but they have all of the customer automation formats already set up. So you can literally go into MailChimp, click on automations, and it'll ask you what type of automation you want to set up. And it has a sequence pre-made for you. So then you're just going in and maybe you're personalizing a few things with your logo, maybe the footer with your social information, but it is very, very straightforward and very simple to set up.
Yeah. So RichE, I think after the call here, we're going to go jump into some pre-built journeys, send some of those. We're going to do some A/B testing on header versus no header, because we've debated this in the past. I hope everyone listening here is kind of getting some ideas on what they want to test next, get their pop-up going to start gathering some emails. So RichE, have I missed any questions here? Or
no, what I was going to actually ask about the journeys you guys just touched on, I was going to mention they're pre-built, a lot of the transactional ones. So
Yep.
You might adjust a few things here and there, but it's not like you have to do anything crazy to set it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you get lost, my number one recommendation is MailChimp has an amazing kind of FAQ and help information on their website. And then if you get lost past that, or you find that you want more video content, if you go on YouTube and pretty much search any question related to MailChimp, you'll find an answer for it, because MailChimp is, I think right now they're about 80% of the entire email marketing market. They dominate above anybody else. And so there's a lot of resources and a lot of help available to get you started if you're just starting out.
Got it. And Amandine, if they're like, I would like to call you and work directly with you to help me out, where would they go?
So I would recommend they go to my website, which is listburst.com. You can see all of my email templates for different industries. And then you can also contact me directly and see examples of my work and the companies that I've worked with, and to see if we're a good fit for each other.
Well, perfect. Amandine, it's great having you on the show and learning some new tips and tricks here. So for everybody listening, hopefully that got you going. Connect your store to MailChimp, send some emails. You know what to do. Get out there and make it happen, everybody. Bye-bye.